Well, thank you. It's just good to see so many people here today, and I just want to welcome all the senators and representatives, and I think everybody knows who they are, and unless anybody want to introduce themselves, I think everybody knows you. So if you have a question, I think what we're going to do, you haven't had a chance to meet Lisa or Simon, and Lisa has been working with all the smaller farmers markets, and Simon has been working with the Atlanta market. And I think y'all all know Brett, and we appreciate the job y'all have done. And if it's all right with y'all, do y'all want to answer the questions when we go along, or wait till the end? I think when we go along, since it's a long report. And so let's get started, okay? Thank you.
Thank you on behalf of Simon. Huge help from Stuart and from Morgan as well. We're grateful to everybody. That's good. He's got a little tear, but he'll be okay. Yeah. We appreciate everyone's time today. This is a summary report. There will be a vertical document report with a lot more detail in it that will come out over the next few weeks. But this represents the key takeaways and recommendations we have from our last several months of working on this. And so the intent today is to cover the following topics. We'll go through how did we do what we did? What was our methodology? Who do we speak to? Just kind of a quick rundown of what we did and what our intent was. And then second, we'll deep dive on the markets, overall performance. We'll look deeply at Atlanta and the impact it has more broadly. And then we'll spend the bulk of the discussion on what we're recommending. In some cases, they're very clear, definitive. In some cases, they're dependent on one or two other pieces of information, and we'll kind of lay that out as we go. So big picture, that's what we'll do over the next couple of hours. And again, encourage questions as we go. We're happy to do it that way. Go to the slide 2. So this talks a little bit about kind of our approach, and we recognize a lot of work had already been done. There have been lots of studies, there have been audits, significant report that produced a kind of a 10-year plan. So we were sensitive to not recreating the wheel or doing redundant work. So we did our best to go through all those reports, speak to some of the creators of it, et cetera, to get a sense of what had been done already so we could leverage that and attempt to use the taxpayers' money carefully here. We didn't go third decimal on every line item in every market, et cetera. So there may be questions we can't answer. And if we can't, and they're important, we will absolutely flag them. And we still have time to answer those things. I think we've addressed all the major issues, but in the time we had and resources we had, we weren't able to go every line item, every market. So just to be clear on that up front. So we expect there'll be some things that we can't fully answer, and we'll try to address those post the time today. The focus today is on the recommendations. That's what we're here for. And we know there's been a lot of discussion about the markets over the last several years. And our attempt here was to try to leverage all that to come up with here's what we believe you should do and why. So that's the intent today. Couple of things that we're touching on here fairly quickly is the Atlanta market. The terminal market is a massive economic engine. We'll talk about what we think that value is. So I'll spend a little time looking at the economics of that market specifically and why we think the way we do about it. The attempt here was kind of 80-20 on everything we did. Enough analysis to make a good decision, but not enough so that we're paralyzed by it. So that was kind of the marching orders, and that's the way we approached it. Any questions about that? Comments? Feel free to jump in. So big picture, we leveraged, if you look at slide 3, we worked closely with the Department of Agriculture. Paul, when he was here, Matt and his team, incredibly helpful. And we met with all the market managers. Just a shout out to them. They're doing a pretty solid job of trying to keep these things profitable on a relative shoestring. And so we appreciated their time and effort in this work we did. But I got to say, everyone we worked with has been incredibly engaging and helpful. It's not always the case when you do work like this as an outside consultant, so we're grateful for that. What we're going to start with is looking at the general state of the markets, and then we'll go into a little bit of a financial analysis around Atlanta. And then we'll work from there into the overall recommendations, and that will get deep dive into Atlanta and all of the small markets. So that's the next step here. turn it over to Simon and let him take this from there.
Okay. Thank you very much. So just to start off with a little bit of a reminder in terms of the general state of the overall markets. Most of this information you will have already seen. The key point here is mainly that of the markets, Atlanta is really that driving force, recognizes almost all of the revenue and profit across the entire set of 9 markets that we're talking about. In general, most of these markets have been operating as being relatively profitable, with some dips in and out of profitability over the course of the last years. Most of them have seen a relative improvement over the course of the last couple of years as improvements have been made during the time of COVID. There are a few markets which we want to call out where we recognize that there has been a more historic trend of underperformance in terms of profitability. Specifically, Savannah has been operating right on the borderline, but has been swinging in and out. Cordele has had a more significant and long-term performance of unprofitability, but has made a dramatic change in the course of the last year, improving their contracts and reducing their expenses by over $100,000. We have to wait and see how that carries forwards. And finally, Macon, which has had its first year of profitability in at least 10 years last year, but is expected, unfortunately, to backslide. But we will confirm the magnitude of that when the 2022 numbers come out, as it is expected to not slide back to as poor a performance as it was prior to the 2021 performance.
Just on that point, Simon, we will update the final numbers to include 2022, but Matt has them to also make sure they're in the final report.
Absolutely.
We'll have 22 for all of them.
Then moving on to just a comment regarding the economic impact of the Atlanta market. We recognize that this is a major force for the entire region, and it acts as such, providing food movement and large quantities of transactional revenue throughout the region. We, as a part of our process, utilized a market evaluation tool called the Sticky Economic Evaluation Device. It's used across the country for evaluating the economic impact of similar markets, and tried to do a simplified version of that process to understand what is the actual impact and magnitude of the Atlanta market. We recognize that there is rent that we are seeing in the region of $6 million per year, but there is significantly more activity which is actually taking place on the site. In terms of specifically the produce movements which are happening there, the transactional revenue is estimated at between $1 and $1.5 billion per year, actually just produce moving through the Atlanta markets. That in and of itself is a huge amount, but the impact it has on the region as a whole is actually even more pronounced. Given its size and scale, we considered it in 2 ways. What is the impact on the specific area of Atlanta and the area around the market itself, which is much more minimal given the operations which are happening at the market, more wholesale movements, and the impact to the region as a whole, because we're seeing this as a driving force for Georgia and the Southeast in general. And given that $1 to $1.5 billion worth of transactional revenue, we're looking at a multiplier effect of 1.6 times. We're really looking at a market which is genuinely bringing economic improvements of 1.6 to $2.4 billion. This is not a small market, and it is not a small force for the region, which is why it becomes so important that we end up focusing on how is it operating and what can be done there. Do you have any questions at this point? Okay, then in which case I will pass this over to Lisa to talk a little bit about the process by which we've gotten here.
Before the big box stores and the supermarkets, the Georgia state farmers markets were the place where members of the community could come together to buy fresh agricultural products directly from consumers. Excuse me. They were places that fostered the growth of their communities by offering goods and services to local communities that were not available elsewhere. The Atlanta Farmers Market operated in the West End from 1941 to 1959 on 16 acres. It quickly outgrew its site and moved to Forest Park in 1959, where it still operates today. When construction of that first market began, the population of Atlanta was 820,000. Population of Georgia was 3.1 million. In 2020, Atlanta's population was over 6 million, and the state of Georgia was roughly 10.7 million. With that growth, the centralized farmers market is no longer the sole place to purchase produce. Many options have filled that role, and as such, the movement of produce to consumers has largely been localized. The need to travel to purchase produce is not the same as it was in 1940, nor the same as in 1959. No longer is the consumer relying on that farmer's market for its produce. And despite this, the markets are largely set up the same way that they were when they began. They are still meant to offer the best possible value for their customers and the best possible outcome for the state. But they also must provide a network of sales of produce throughout Georgia and the Southeast, all while maintaining a viable market for Georgia farmers and their farm products in the communities where they're located. To achieve these goals, the markets must serve their customers, but who are their customers? We would argue that the customer of the markets can be looked at in 3 different ways, each with their own priorities. Who are the potential customers of the markets? We believe that there are potentially 3 sets, each with a different priority. Georgia farmers, Georgia agriculture, businesses, restaurants, stores, etc., and Georgia consumers. The Georgia farmer is looking for a place to market and sell its produce and an opportunity to compete with out-of-state players by having a low-cost place to sell. Agriculture businesses, restaurants are looking to either house, move, or purchase high quality and safe produce at the lowest possible price, and for having a forum for contacting as many potential suppliers as possible. And Georgia consumers are looking for a safe location to source high quality, safe, affordable products. The purposes of the markets can look very differently when looked through the lens of these different customers. While each of the markets has unique characteristics that serve one or more of the customers and multiple purposes, the general bias is toward wholesale produce sales. And this chart reflects that. We narrowed down to 5 key overall purposes served by each of the markets. And these we feel are the primarily areas of focus. We have wholesale produce sales, which is the movement of produce through wholesale channels. Retail sales via market. Direct produce sales from farmers to consumers. Support of non-agro businesses through lease space and meeting space for government agencies, et cetera. We've highlighted the prevalence of each of these purposes based on the legend at the bottom. A couple of notes, and I'll take questions if you have any on the chart. All of the markets have a wholesale component. For most, that is the most important component to the success of their market. All sell produce to consumers via a retail channel of some sort, but with varying focus. Valdosta and Moultrie focusing more on retail, maybe in number of establishments, maybe than some of the others. Atlanta and Moultrie house some office space dedicated to government agencies, and a few other markets have some peanut inspectors, and that's reflected in the shading there. But very few of the markets sell produce directly from farmers to consumers. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Which markets sell produce from the farmer to commit to the?
So in Augusta, they average between 4 and 5 farmers a year, but generally they have one that's constant. On Cairo, they do not have any farmers selling directly to consumers. Cordeal has various numbers. The manager didn't have a specific number, but she said they come and go. They have a decent presence. Macon, we have a few, didn't have a good number, but not many. Let's see. Moultrie, we have no farmers selling directly. Savannah, 1. Thomasville, no farmers. And Valdosta, no farmers. And those would be those that would come sell in a stall. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How many businesses rent space?
We have 8.
You go through each one,
Yes, sir.
each market, how many rents space?
Yes, sir. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. So in Augusta, we have 8 businesses that rent space. 8, sir.
Okay.
Mhm. In Cairo, there are 4. They have some trucks that pay for parking.
At Augusta, you had 8.
Yes.
What kind of businesses are they?
We have a brewery. We have 2, 3, 4 produce wholesalers. There's an agriculture, I think it's antibiotics or some sort of pharmaceutical. There's a meat processor that hasn't started selling or excuse me, processing their meat yet, but they're working on it, and that should be coming online soon.
What's the name of it?
I believe
What's the
that is
name of that company?
Union Egner, I believe. FPL, I'm sorry. Union Egner is that the antibiotic pharmaceutical. Cairo, we have 4 companies. And I can name the companies if you'd like as we go through. Cordeal, we have 1, 2, 3, 7.
Are those 7 at all times?
No, they're not.
How much are they there?
I believe that, let's see, 2 of them are seasonal. I'm sorry, one of the ones I listed there was an inspection office. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6 companies that are paying rent. Calhoun Produce and Indian Hills are seasonal. In Macon, we have 13 businesses. 6 of those are produce vendors. And 7 of those are various businesses that are not specifically selling produce, but are renting space.
Representative Watson.
Pardon me?
Would that be like Bistro to Go?
Yeah, you've got an event space company, Bistro to Go, a tea company, a cafe that's not in currently operating, but they pay for their space, a bakery. And then in Moultrie, we have, let's see, we have, I believe, 12. And a lot of those are stores or retail sales, Market Produce, Market Seafood, Mike's Country Store, Market Ice, Market Barbecue. And then there are a few businesses that are not agriculture related, like Newsom Electric, Ellen Stone Plumbing. In Savannah, we have 7 businesses. Of those, we have several in-laws, Savannah Spice, sell wholesale. We have a restaurant, barbecue restaurant. We have a retail hardware store, a sign store. And then in Thomasville, we have 15 businesses. They range from wholesalers to a pocket change vending company, a construction company, a meat market, a custom trim shop. Valdosta, we have 3 businesses. 2 are grocery stores, or excuse me, produce markets, not grocery stores. And 1 is a pecan business.
Representative Watson, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a question. And I don't know if it's for Simon or not, but when we were talking about transactional revenue, and I was just reading some of your notes down here about how hard some of that was to come up with or would take further studying. Do we, and then I noticed kind of the Georgia farmers were one of the 3 customers to the farmers markets. How much of the produce or the transactional value of the produce is Georgia grown, or do we don't know?
Unfortunately, it kind of falls into the same category. There is approximately $660 million worth of produce, which is actually checked when it comes through the site in terms of gate logs and the like. Outside of that, for many of the tenants, they don't need to stop, and as a result, there is no vision in terms of how much of their goods is or is not Georgia produce. So we can't with confidence say it is precisely this amount because there is a large quantity where the figures are currently obfuscated by just a simple lack of needing to report on those.
But that 660, you don't know where it's coming from. You just know that it's coming in there.
So I don't have the number with me right now, but I can certainly answer your question. Of that 660 million, how much of that is Georgia versus other areas?
I've got a question. How can you tell when it wasn't checked when it was coming in?
That's what was checked.
Yeah.
The ones that washed, the percentage that was
So
checked,
for
doing
the-
a percentage basis.
So I don't.
What
as I
about
said-
Cordial? Do they check when they come in at Cordial?
They do stop trucks, yes, when they come in, but I don't have those numbers.
Yeah, there are some sites which check stop trucks. Not all of the smaller markets actually stop all trucks. It is something which is done intermittently and not done consistently across the pool of state farmers markets. Not even done consistently across the site at Atlanta as to how much, as to what gets stopped or not gets stopped, because there is a rule for tenants who bring in on their own trucks that they don't need to be stopped.
Representative Gilliard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's kind of quietly problematic because we're looking at the stability of farmers and Georgia businesses. That's a lot of money coming through. I think it's something that we need to look at is the process of identifying the number of Georgia businesses versus outside. And I mean, this is the economic wheel for that much money be coming into Georgia and not benefit our farmers. I think we really need to look at that somehow. Is there any way that you can find out from, for instance, in Savannah, they're coming in and they're weighing those particular persons that are selling or bringing in produce. We know that we have Stokes Produce. That's our lay of the land in the Savannah State Farmers Market. But in a terminal like Atlanta, I think that's something that needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
We would agree.
Recommendation is that you put a process in place to do that. Yes, we agree.
We agree wholeheartedly. One of the recommendations is actually to implement effectively the gate checking or the gate log for all of the trucks bringing produce onto the market, so that we actually have an understanding of what goods are coming in and out of said market.
We'll have to have the staff and system to do that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is that why we're seeing more what I still call mom and pops on the sides of the road with all their produce selling them? Y'all don't know, y'all don't see any of that. Let me just give you an example.
I'm not sure what your question was. I apologize. Yes, we
Well-
I couldn't link to the why though.
Oh, but basically, if they're not in a truck that's going into the market, they are uncounted.
That's correct.
That was,
Yeah,
okay.
that would be true.
Because I know at times when I can't find what I'm looking for, I would drive down here because I know the hours, the young man, the
Yeah.
guy that brings his downtown. So how is that affecting any of this, or is it? It's just somebody, I mean, they don't have to get a permit. They don't have to do anything. They just stop on the side of the road because,
Yeah, we have no visibility into it because it's not tracked. But
Okay.
it's a fair question. Is it impacting it? Perhaps. It'd be hard to guess how much.
that's what I was about to say. I know I spent a lot because if I see them and they got what I want, I'm buying. Yeah, okay.
There are no further questions. I'll turn it over to Simon.
One more for.
Oh, I'm
Ma'am.
sorry, sir.
On the, all of these numbers that you gave us just a while ago of businesses that are renting space,
Yes, sir.
how much is that rental income that we bringing in is part of the budget overall?
How much is the rental income part of the overall revenue stream? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Almost exclusively.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's just about all of it. Yeah. That is the
Yeah.
revenue stream.
The combination of rental and also gate fees in some locations is
would you say 90% or?
Sure,
think
it's close to that probably. but
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the vast majority. Is it 75 or is it 90? I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's the vast majority.
The other fees would be scale fees, weight. If someone's paying for storage of parking their semi, some markets will allow rental of, if somebody wants to leave a semi on the market, they can do that for a fee. Some of it is, a lot of the markets don't have separate water lines for the different buildings, so they charge a certain fee for use of the water, just a flat fee. So some of that is in the revenue numbers as well.
but as a
But by and
general-
large, it's
as a generality, the revenue numbers are largely driven by the tenants, their lease rates, and those ancillary fees, which are being levied against people who are using the facilities for various and sundry reasons. We do not recognize any revenue as a result of the produce which is being sold there, is the key point which I want to make there.
Thank you.
thank you.
So with all of that discussion around kind of who are the customers of the markets, and the importance of that comes back to how has the market system changed over the course of its lifetime. There is, as Lisa mentioned, there has been a dramatic shift in terms of the customer base and in terms of the operations from when it was originally founded back in 1940 through towards today. Realistically, back in our past, we as the farmers markets were more focused on providing produce to consumers to be able to actually use for themselves. In today's day and age, most of these state farmers markets are more focused on the wholesale movements and on ensuring that there is movement of produce throughout the region. It is less focused on ensuring that the produce actually makes it to your door so that you can end up cooking for yourself. That's kind of where supermarkets have taken the role. And to that point, we just wanted to highlight the fact that we have considered this to be a more of a statement in terms of what is the general drive and the focus of the networks of the farmers markets as a whole. Realistically, we see these farmers markets as being a distribution network. It is very important, and they help provide those movements of produce throughout the entire region, throughout the state, and across state borders as well, to a certain degree. And that is almost implied. It is not explicitly stated as a mission or goal, but it is almost implied as the mission of the markets these days, which is to facilitate that distribution network of produce throughout the region. And and it still ensures that the Georgia consumers have access to fresh and wholesome produce, but not by being the direct handoff point, but being the intermediary to ensure that it gets to the place where it needs to be. We still want to recognize the fact that there are secondary benefits, that while we mention that wholesale movements are the driving force, that by no means should downplay the secondary benefits, which are also being recognized, which are, some degree of retail sales, opportunities for the development of agribusinesses and other appropriate farmers and the like on these sites and through use of these sites, and also the support that the markets would play for government agencies and the others who end up leasing out their spaces. But those are not the primary focus that we see for the markets as it currently stands. Any questions? Otherwise, I'll pass over to Brett and we will start talking about what are our actual recommendations, given all of this context.
When you say the farmers are down there selling stuff, are there people that went and bought produce from other places and come sell it there? Or are they true farmers that are going down there and selling it?
What we've seen, go ahead, Lisa, you know there's much in it.
Both are true. There are folks who purchase produce, say from Atlanta or some other market or place and resell it.
Yeah.
And there are farmers that sell it direct.
Yeah.
And how do we know? I guess we don't.
I just know the
On a
most,
smaller scale.
But there is certainly some degree to which there are people who are purchasing produce and then moving and then reselling that said produce.
yeah.
But without actually effectively grilling every single person who enters the
No,
market.
but no, I mean, I just know a lot of people that would go buy it somewhere else and bring it in to sell it. I didn't know if we had a lot of that. And you call them Georgia farmers. I didn't. I don't.
Totally. I don't think we have evidence that there's a lot of that going on, but there's not a lot of that.
There's nothing,
produce
it's
being
not,
sold,
not
period. So,
a
yeah,
lot of stuff, not a lot of produce moving.
that's
anyway.
it. So it's a small
Very
percent of a small number.
small amount moving.
Yeah, that's what we're talking
Because
about.
I have a farmer's market in my town, but it's run by the city. And we have people who are maybe, you wouldn't bring stuff in and sell it there. But it's a city, it's just run by the city.
There are, as I think we all know, a lot of farmers markets in the state of Georgia. A lot of them are city owned or privately owned, and those are filling that role, I think, to a large
Yeah,
extent.
it's really changing and everybody goes there
It
too.
has. Absolutely has. That's true.
Representative Goodman,
When we ship our blueberries,
Senator, excuse me. Well, he never has been. We trained you.
I was just curious in terms of the Atlanta market.
Yeah.
So when we ship our blueberries, they go to our co-op owns a DC,
Right.
and then the loads are then put together at that DC and shipped to the DC of Publix or the DC of Kroger or whatever else.
Right.
Now, when we've got a business, we make Georgia grown and American grown cobblers, and we have to with some of the retailers we have to ship to consolidators,
Right.
and you may pay 5% fee or whatever, but
Yeah.
basically it goes to this consolidator, and then this consolidator has maybe 500 different items that they keep in stock, and they build these loads going to each DC. You see what I'm saying? Because they might want but 3 pallets of my cobblers, but they won't whatever.
Right.
In terms of what's going on in Atlanta, is that it's primarily wholesale, right? Is that a function of kind of what's going on in Atlanta in terms of consolidating, where people are bringing in all sorts of different produce and then they're building loads going to different DCs? Is that primarily when we talk about the wholesale part of it, is that what's going on there?
I know some of that is going on there. I'm pausing because I don't think I can say primarily what is going on there. I think there is some of that.
There is certainly some of that. There is also some recognition that some of those players who are at the Atlanta market are actually, rather than moving to a DC, they are actually delivering direct to restaurants or to places from the, effectively they're acting as the DC there at the Atlanta market. So they're consolidating and then moving directly to the doing deliveries direct to restaurants from the Atlanta market. So there's a bit of multiple different ways in which they are operating as wholesale movements.
So in terms of percentage wise in Atlanta, how much of the, and you probably don't have an answer to this, but just throw a dart at the wall in terms of, selling direct to consumers, in terms of selling to area restaurants in Atlanta, and then the remainder, is that going to major retailers across the country primarily? I'm curious to where this produce is going.
Yeah.
I don't know, we can answer that.
I'm not sure I can answer that, largely because the only way to know is to get into effectively the books of the tenants on the site, who have no obligation as it stands to tell us what they're doing there. So I can't really state what level of those different operations are actually happening. I don't think
about the one or two that we know the best, some of the larger ones there. And again, completely anecdotal. You asked to throw a dart at the wall, so I'll take an attempt. I think a good portion of it is going to retailers in and around Atlanta and broadly Georgia and the Southeast. I don't think you see a lot of it going from there across the country. So I think it's predominantly here in the state of Georgia and then the surrounding states. But what is in state versus out, I don't think we have a clue on that. Very little direct to consumer, a fair bit to local and state retailers and some to out of state retailers, but I couldn't give you the breakdown to that.
Senator Walker.
So we had this is a topic we've been working on for several years. Chairman Houston and myself and others on the committee. And at one time we had a committee meeting at the Atlanta Farmers Market. Yeah. And if you look on page 7, these are some of the major tenants at the Atlanta Farmers Market in the middle.
Right, exactly right.
And my understanding is there's some repacking, a good bit of repacking being done. And I assumed, and I could be wrong, but that was where they were getting semi-loads of produce from the farm, but it wasn't packaged to be sold at the grocery store. And so
that's a great point. Yes,
so they're doing
happening.
repacking. That's a big part.
Yeah.
And that's why the cooler space is so critical for those businesses. And then if you look at these names, certainly Sutherland's is a familiar name, and Collins.
Yep.
And you're probably familiar with those businesses, Senator Goodman. And my impression is that Sutherland's is kind of like a Cisco in a way, and they probably have independent grocers and restaurants.
I think that's true.
As customers, not probably so much the large chain grocers like Kroger or Publix, but that's if you think about those companies and who they sell to, that I think would give you some idea of what's going on there. But I think repacking is a real big part of what's happening there. And I would think that is a critical service for Georgia farmers. And
certainly Collins does a lot of repacking. That's absolutely
very important.
Yeah.
Because makes sense for them to invest in all that it takes to do that versus a farmer, even a large farmer. Do y'all do much repacking at the Moultrie Farmers Market, or is your produce repacked by somebody? But ultimately, somebody's packaging it, I would think, for the.
Well, not the situation we are.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah, and part of it will be that repacking, and part of it will also be effectively, if you think about it, bucketing. Effectively, you take all the different, you've got your blueberries and your peaches and whatever that's come in, and now that restaurant that wants to have our purchase. Now we need to make sure we have gotten just what that restaurant is looking for. So not just
Consolidating at a small
repalletizing
level.
it, but down to a small level of now I've got the goods that that customer wants to actually end up seeing.
What we see in some terminal markets is you carry semi-load of blueberries to New Jersey and they reject 3 pallets. Well, the blueberries are in New Jersey and the major retailers rejected 3 pallets. So it goes to the terminal market there. And most times it's not repacked. Most times it's sold at some kind of reduced rate, but that's something that we use for blueberries in that regard. Blueberries are a little bit different, like, Representative Watson with his squash. It's a little bit easier to repack a box of squash than it would be to repack, 144 boxes with 12 pint clamshells per box of a pallet of blueberries, so.
True that.
Yeah, good deal.
If there are no other questions.
We're going to move on to slide 11 and start to get into the recommendations now. And so this slide 11 is high level, what we're recommending, and then we'll go into each of these recommendations in detail. So starting with the overall market management, we believe establishing authority is the right approach there. And on the next slide, we'll get into what that means, the detail of that and what we want to think about when we go through that. But the bottom line is that we can use an authority to put the appropriate business structure, governance systems in place so we can answer a lot of these questions and better manage this large economic engine we have. And so we feel strongly that an authority is the right way to go. We know we've been down that path before, but more on that in a second. Then high level for site specific, Atlanta, the retail operation there is a safety risk, food and human safety risk. And we believe that it should be removed from the site. More on that in a second. I just don't think having retail mixed with the wholesale there is a safe proposition. Second, lease rates, as we know, haven't been moved in quite some time. We believe they do need to be adjusted, and we would implement a rate review process, including looking at subleasing and making sure that is properly managed. Again, we'll get into more of all of these in a sec. Thirdly, on Atlanta, create and communicate a plan for future improvements as part of an authority. What's going to be the process? How are we going to have a transparent, open process for doing improvements, and how do we communicate that to our tenants and prospective tenants? On the regional side, we believe conveying Savannah, Garden City, to the local municipality, the operation would make the most sense. They have a good plan, and that looks like the most viable approach there. Again, more on that in a second. Given Cairo and Thomasville are so close to each other and both are very, very small, we think there's value in consolidating those two, which we'll come to again in a sec. Third, and maybe one of the more important ones based on some of the conversation we've had even this morning and in the past couple of sessions, is to conduct an in-depth review for markets that are unprofitable and particularly repeatedly unprofitable markets. So Cordele, Macon, we need a process to look at those, put a set of rules in place by which if profitability doesn't get achieved, then you could take several actions. Well, obviously you could sell it, convey it, or shut it. And so we'll get more into that in a second, but we do have markets that are perennially unprofitable. And we think there's a process that should be put in place to manage those more effectively. And we believe that you can retain the rest of the markets and that would be justified. But we'll talk about that as we get into the small market play. But again, if you have a process in place, if a small market that's been doing well all of a sudden has a period of time where it's no longer doing well and something systemic has changed, then it would go through this process to determine whether you want to keep it or not. Just general operational improvements for all sites. We know we've got to put in a process to get bill of lading for trucks coming onto the market for all trucks. That's going to require some resources to do it, but we think it's important that you have that information. Similarly, having the resources to do regular contract reviews so we can have better transparency and more granularity around what contracts are being done and that they meet the spec that we've all agreed to. And then lastly, to create and provide a list of approved recommended vendors and contractors for work on site, for maintenance, et cetera. I think there's benefit in having 1 or 2 contractors that could do that, get to know us, get good pricing from, et cetera. So we will go into each of these now in more detail, starting with establishing an authority on slide 12. So as we know, we've been down this path before, but we believe it is the right approach in that we would want to put all the markets into this. Big picture, the pros, transparency for results and performance of the market. So we'll know exactly what's going on and why. ability to retain revenue and reinvest that based on the needs of the various markets and the statutes that we agreed to when we found the set up the authority. We think it's the easiest pathway to apply the best business practices in general. And we've looked at other options, and we're happy to go into those, but we think this is the easiest and best path to provide that kind of classic business practice. It allows for establishment and management of multi-year contracts, which we're not currently doing. Allows for more options in financing. We have access to bonds possibly if we go through an authority. So we think the pros are fairly substantial. Cons, it does require passage of legislation. You guys know better than we do that can be time consuming. And requires clear definition of roles for the management and the governance structure. And what we've seen in other authorities in the state is laid out there on slide 12. Generally speaking, the governor appoints a few, lieutenant governor, speaker, chairperson is elected, and generally speaking, the ag commissioner is a ex officio member as well. And that at a high level, that structure looks right to us, but you all have more experience with setting up authorities than we do. It's in your power to do so, but that's our high level comment on kind of the governance structure. But getting that governance structure right is critical. Right people in the room, making the right decisions with the right data is what you're aiming for. Let me stop there. Questions or comments on the authority? Because we can go a lot deeper into that, but we'd love to hear the room's kind of general view on that.
Representative, Senator Anderson.
Other states, have they got authorities?
Yes. Most of the terminal markets like Philadelphia are in some form of authority.
Or working alongside one.
Yeah, or partnered with one.
Specifically, the Philadelphia one is actually, it's not under an authority, but it has been funded by an authority for their initial setup. So they've got a very close, I think specifically, if my memory serves, it's the Ports Authority there, where they have a very close relationship with them and work in partnership.
To that point, we have talked to other authorities in the state of Georgia. There is an option, and it's later in the appendix, that you could bring it into an existing authority. And there's pros and cons to that. And the Agriculture and Exposition Authority is one, but the little bit of digging we did there and talking to other authorities, we think the challenge may be greater than the benefit, but I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand. If there's an authority that is a logical place for it to coexist, and they're truly on a similar mission, it's something you could do. We didn't see that as obvious from the conversations we had, but we didn't do endless research on that topic.
Representative Watson.
So on the pros, I mean, I feel like honestly that the department could probably do all of these themselves, except maybe retain the revenue. I mean, I think if we, hounded them hard enough, they could make people check in at the gate and provide some transparency and do some of this stuff, except the retained revenue, which this is a lot about, is the money.
Yeah.
And how do we get more money into the markets? And then going back to on page 4, not necessarily for 2021, but for 2020. And I don't know which one is the realist, if that's a word, or actual as far as revenue goes. But I just, in my head, I continue to go that, we have the Ag Trust Fund that's set up now where there's 1.8 million, I think last year, that went in to it that the department gets. And then they usually request every year $1 million in bonds that we pretty much always give them. So that's 2.8 million in funds that they're getting today.
Yeah.
We create an authority, they get 3.2 as of 2020. That's 400 and something, $80,000 difference. But if you're an authority, then you have to have a director, and then you have to have staff, and then you have to have benefits and retirement and all the stuff that goes with that. So that eats all that up. And so what have we done? Are we going to raise the rent and make a whole lot more, and then it becomes viable? And I guess then we lose control, and then that's totally up to the authority, right?
Go ahead if you have something you want to say. I've got a couple of
To
comments.
that comment, just one of the points I wanted to make sure I reference is, do remember that the 3.8 or was specifically the profit in 2020. So the expenses for operation are dramatically above that as well, and the revenue actually comes in dramatically higher. Again, we're still in the region of more like $6 and $7 million in terms of revenue. So while there are the retention of revenue and the allocation of revenue, certainly there are some benefits in terms of being able to effectively allocate it within. I guess the comment I'm trying to make is the stable assumption of this is the amount of money that we can end up using. The benefit from that largely actually comes from being able to do things over a longer term and being able to set things up over longer terms. One of the benefits which isn't necessarily recognized there is the fact that everything which currently goes through the markets has to be set up for a 1-year term because of the association with appropriations. So being able to actually plan things over multiple years and set up relationships over multiple years ends up being a large driver of the benefits in terms of the expenses as well.
Additionally, Atlanta being such a large economic engine and knowing that there's going to need to be a significant uplift in the facilities there, and thus funding will be required. An authority gives a much better option for that piece as well, not just operating, but longer term improvements that I think could be justified. But big picture, what needs to happen next, if it is to a deep dive into what the authority would look like, not look like, what are the expenses and costs related to setting it up, that needs to happen if you're going to get serious about doing it. So I don't disagree. Some of that is relevant. I think it needs to be part of a broader piece of work that says, this is what it would look like versus the other option. And here's the pros and cons, and you have a clear-eyed view of it, and you make a decision based on that.
Well, and I understand a lot of that, but we do a lot of long-term projects as a general appropriation that are set up and established, and requests are made and buildings are built and things are done as well. So
I believe it. I just looking at our myopic lens of the terminal in Atlanta farmers market.
Right.
We haven't seen that over the last decade, but so for whatever
Right.
reason, it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Not saying it couldn't.
And that's one thing about, I think is really we need, Garden City is going to do a lot more for that farmer's market than we'd be willing to
Yeah.
put the money in. The state would not be putting the money that Garden City and do the things that they've got a plan.
Yeah.
And we've had a plan and we haven't done it. We've been filling with this farmer's market in Garden City a long time. And now the city's coming up with a plan and it's a great plan. And I know we would be funding it.
right.
And,
Well,
and
and
so
I-
I'm just tickled to death that y'all recommended. I'm excited about Garden City. And
Yeah,
what
we
they-
are too.
I
think
could
it's a
not
good
believe
plan.
the plan that they had. And
Well, and I guess I just go, a lot of authorities are,
I'm just talking about
Yeah.
that Garden City when I just pulled that off.
right.
And
And I guess most authorities though have been created with the beginning of a project, not a,
well,
Yeah,
look at the
it-
Ports Authority, but of course it's.
Yeah.
And
here's our headache. Thank you for taking this over.
It's not without its challenges, but
uh,
bottom line is the path that provides the most transparency and the most business-like view of the market and ability to invest in it like a business based on profitability and overall economic impact is what needs to happen. The authority is a way to do that. It is not the only way. I would agree with that.
Representative Walker. Senator.
So,
I knew his daddy better than him.
thank you, Madam Chair. So not to be argumentative, but you would have the additional expense, no doubt, of an executive director and some executive directors, administrative staff that you don't have currently, but you don't have, I mean, you already are bearing the expense of all the market managers and the employees and the maintenance people and all that. We're already bearing that expense. So that would not be new expense. So to me, it's basically the additional personnel would be just in the executive level of the managing the market. I do like the idea, like the way the Georgia World Congress Center Authority works. They just issued a huge bond to finance 1,000-room hotel that's under construction, and the revenues from the rental of the hotel to Hilton or whoever it is, a Hilton product, is going to service the bonds. And so I think it particularly, let's say even at Moultrie, but certainly in Atlanta, we need more. We keep hearing that we need more cooler space and a lot of upgrades, and the $1 million a year that we've been appropriating isn't going to cut it. I mean, I think you could spend $50 million at the Atlanta Farmers Market. And if you had the tenants and they would rent it and service the debt, the authority could issue bonds and to do that. And I know the state could issue bonds to do it, but we just haven't done it for whatever reason. I just think an authority would give whoever is on the authority is going to give a lot of focus and attention to that one thing. And we're in the legislature, we're just, inundated with a multitude of issues. So I like the retaining of the revenue, and I like the ability to issue bonds for big projects that have a long-term impact. I like the governance structure that you've laid out here. I do think we need to think, if we go the authority route, and I'm open-minded on this, but if we go the authority route, I think we need to think about who would want to serve on this authority, and then naturally would be your anchor tenants would want to serve on the authority. And I think that's potentially a conflict. And so we have to consider that in how we lay out who can be on the authority. I mean, you don't want to put a bunch of people on there that are just interested in serving their own interest or their own business interests.
You want to take their interest at heart. I'm not sure, you would necessarily want them on the board per se, but there's ways to do that.
But I think the other, and I don't want to jump ahead because you may have it in here, but Chairman Watson and I have talked about how the Department of Natural Resources on their state parks are retaining revenue for maintenance and operation of the state parks. And that's in code, in the Georgia code, to allow them to do that.
Yeah.
And that is a simpler way, I think, to maybe accomplish the revenue part. The disadvantage I see to that is they still couldn't do the long-term, huge, big projects that would be, game-changing type projects that needed bonding. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If there are other questions, we'll go. Senator Say.
Well, I was just gonna kind of comment on some of the same things, because we've been talking about this for years. And all I'd like to see us do is get out of neutral. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, we have had viability over there for years, and then all of a sudden everything started going downhill. Neutral just not a place for me. And that was my comment.
Thank you.
I think to cut to the chase, I think the simplest thing that needs to happen next is look at the incremental cost of doing it in authority or another way versus the incremental benefit and additional revenue, longer term. If you're able to invest, what's the long-term benefit of that investment? Do an analysis of what that incremental cost versus benefit is of options A versus B, let's say, and force yourself to stick to it, make a decision around that. I would strongly recommend that as the next step, regardless of anything else. So you bring up some very fair points, Chair Watson, and I think we need to look at that. But I think in any way you go, you've got to do something different. And so the question is, what's the authority? What does that effort look like versus some tweaks to our current system to allow for some of the things you just mentioned? So,
Representative Watson.
Yes. It's along those same lines. Those are decisions that are still ultimately left up to us. I mean, we're the ones that have to approve
that's right.
the bonds, whether it be an authority
That's
or
exactly
whether it be the Department of Agriculture. So, I mean, some of us are to blame for the lack of movement on anything over there, I think.
fair enough. We're going to move on to more details on the other recommendations. I'm going to turn it over to Simon. So we just talked about the authority piece. Now he'll talk about the other recommendations.
Yeah, I think we already mentioned these. This is just a couple of extra additional points of considerations that would have to be thought of with regards to the authority. But I think we already touched on that. There are concerns and there are complications that we would have to think through. But getting into the site-specific recommendations, here we want to just talk a bit about a few of our recommendations in more detail. At the Atlanta market, there are really three things that we were recommending. One was around fully removing the retail operations from the site. Now, we recognize that there are other concerns and there are some commitments to Georgia farmers to ensure that we have the ability to sell on site. And given that, we recommend, we're stating that it would be ideal to be able to remove the retail operations from the site because it is a safety risk. The combination of pedestrians with commercial, individual and personal vehicles on site combined with commercial vehicles moving around on site is truly just an unsafe situation. My background is largely, I've worked at, I've done work for logistics companies, for mines, for heavy industry, and I can quite comfortably say that if the operations at the Atlanta market were under the realm of any of them, it would have been shut down because of health and safety concerns. It's just not maintainable. The alternative, of course, would be to effectively segregate the operations at the site. So all of the commercial vehicles end up operating in one area and all of the individual personal vehicles and pedestrian traffic happens in another area. We recognize that that may be a more tenable option going forward, but I think realistically, it has to be one or the other for just the safety and security of the sites. Secondly, we also recommend that there is a creation and communication of an improvements plan to all the tenants. And this is more of a, it helps in two ways. One, it helps in terms of the budgetary process and ensures that that it is in everybody's mind in terms of what are the improvements that we would like to have happen over the upcoming years. But also it helps the tenants themselves in terms of understanding what they should be expecting. And it helps with regards to what is effectively recommendation 3, which is a review of leasing and lease rates. At the Atlanta market, at many of the markets, current market rates are dramatically higher than what we are currently leasing at, and implementing a process by which those rates are regularly reviewed. And I would include specifically any subleasing arrangements are also reviewed at that point in time, is a necessity to ensure that these remain sites which would be competitive. That's where I say that it goes hand in hand with the construction plan and improvement plan, because understanding that there are improvements that are coming will help sell the rate improvements that we believe are necessary to bring back in line with the market. We also recognize that those lease rates, we may still decide not to go to full market rates, but decide to operate at a slight market discount because we're trying to support them as a region, support their operations within the region. But currently the disconnect to market rates is dramatic, ranging anywhere from 100% off to, I think in some places it was almost 500% increase in price would be required to get back to market rates. Yeah, and I get into that on the next slide, specifically with regards to the Atlanta rates. But first, I want to just pause here in case there are any questions with regards to these recommendations.
Well, not only recommendation, if you left the retail thing, people shouldn't be able to walk from the retail space over to the produce. That's got to be because of food safety. Food
Yes.
safety is really important to me.
Yeah.
And having people walk back and forth, you can't control it.
Yeah, this particular
And
element.
we've got a lot of good folks, tenants out there, and if something happened with food safety, it would be devastating to all of the state and the whole produce thing.
You will find that there is kind of a trend in a couple of these recommendations. One about the retail operations on site, second, the bill of lading, which is a general operational one, and third about the contractors and vendors on site. All three of those are largely tied together as safety and health and safety recommendations, because there are just a certain amount of while we own the sites, there is a certain obligation to understand what is happening on those sites. Because if there is a major safety crisis or if there is a major accident which ends up happening, we need to be able to react and be able to drill down on those, whether it's a food safety issue or a health and safety personnel walking around, a vehicle safety issue. All of those fall into one big category of improvements.
Thank you, Cindy Anderson.
How would you handle the lease rates that hadn't been changed in over 14 years?
Quite frankly, all of them are all on kind of a year-to-year basis, the lease renewals. So they just need to go through a process of recognition, of publicized review of the rate, saying we need to move these back in line or at least approximating market rates, whether that's decided to be matching market rates or matching a percentage of market rates. That is a decision that can be made, but it would be a statement of on next renewal, rates will be going
Would
up.
you look at the lease every 2 years, or?
We would recommend effectively implementing a review probably every 1 to 2 years. I would say every 2 years of the rate, saying these are the current, that there should be a
I mean,
process.
let it be in the contract.
Yeah,
Oh, in the
there would
contract,
be
it should be, yes.
contractual obligation to do the review. The other piece of this is it would be naive to say, let's just go bring the rates to market and so be it. You may lose some tenants. So we need to be thoughtful about this and do this in a way that shows we're making some improvements. We need to bring the rates in line. So you should do this in an open communication with your tenant base so they understand why you're doing what you're doing and that they've had some input into it. But we've got to get the rates up, but it needs to be married with a plan to do some improvements beyond what we've done in the past or been able to do.
Yes.
Are you going to offer them anything else more than what they're getting now if you increase the rate?
It would be a commitment to making improvements that we'll have to work through exactly what those mean. So that's a hand wavy answer, but there would be something tied to it, but it would be not a quid pro quo. It's, we are going to be raising the rates. We're going to be doing these things. We need your input on help us prioritize that list of improvements, and you bring those things together.
Yes, and that's why we say that second recommendation, the plan of improvements, is critical to work alongside the rate review, to show what are we actually bringing to the table as we bring the rates back in line with what the market should expect.
Representative Watson.
I was just gonna say, I've had folks raising the rents and rates up on me in the last year pretty regular on everything I'm touching.
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about it. I'd just raise it and go with what you gotta go with.
You know, there
And
is a
not-
fair point there with that. You could probably do across the board raise of some percentage and not have to explain yourself, and then you can move from there.
Yeah,
a very
that's
fair
right.
comment.
Especially in 14 years.
Yeah, especially 14 years.
Yeah.
And just to follow up on the subleasing agreements, did we ever figure out how much of that was going on, and are they all covered? This said you would cover those arrangements.
So we did look into those. There is a certain degree to which subleasing is happening with knowledge of the Department of Agriculture, because the official arrangement is that the subleasing requires any subleasing as it stands requires pre-approval by the Department of Agriculture. And there are a few situations where that is happening. Our recommendation here would actually be that is included in the rate review, because frankly, if there is any subleasing which has gone on for an extended period of time, let's say 5 years, that's not subleasing anymore.
Right.
That should be a
Yeah.
lease, and it should be addressed appropriately. And it should be included in the rate review, the inclusion of all of the subleasing to review, is this still a valid sublease, or should it actually be considered as a new tenant rather than a separate sublease?
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, I think 5 years is a long time to sublease.
Yeah. It's too long.
Yeah, I use that as an example, but
Oh, okay.
I imagine it would probably be a shorter period of that.
Yeah.
Maybe if we're saying a 2-year lease renewal,
Yeah.
or a 2-year interval for lease rate reviews, then I would include it at that point. So every 2 years, you're reviewing whether or not there is any extended period subleasing that should be considered. Is it still valid sublease, or is it actually should be gone and considered for true tenancy?
Senator Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It bothers me a little bit that talking about lease rates and we're below market. And in the list of tenants that she mentioned at some of these more rural markets, I guess, or smaller markets, one of them I remember was a electrical contractor. One is a cabinet shop or a trim shop. What are we doing here? I mean, that bothers me a little bit that we're competing with the private sector at a subsidized rent rate for something that has absolutely nothing to do with agriculture. I mean, I guess you could argue that farmers need electricians sometimes and buy cabinets, but
You can extend that pretty far.
that just bothers me that we're doing that.
What they pay me and I know what they get.
You could envision a world where you had, as part of a new structure to govern these markets, is you have some rules around that. I would also point out probably the reason some of them are profitable is because of those kind of things. So I know it's not the intent of it, but you've got a market manager who's just trying to meet ends meet. You can understand how you end up in that world. But if that's not the mission, then you would need to put something in place to adjust that.
And you've got some extra space and you've got to do something with it.
Yeah,
You're desperate to make some money.
that's what's happening.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm feeling sorry for I mean, I can imagine how you'd feel having that extra space and you've got to, you know, show a little bit of a bottom line and nobody wants it.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's not like they're
Uh-huh.
looking for a cabinet
It's
maker and
not
telling the
like they
farmer to
got-
go away. It's
Yeah.
I've got all this space and I can't.
They've
I
got the
can't lease
space
it
and they
out."
can't do anything with it,
Yeah.
you know, nobody else wants it.
That is where I would actually also come back to the idea of the rate review, because if you are ending up doing a regular rate review, you've got your tenant now, you've brought in a cabinet maker to try and make ends meet. In a couple of years, we do another review and say, well, is there still nobody else who can come in and take that place who would be an appropriate agriculture representative in for the site? After a certain amount of time, there should be a process in place to say, well, okay, we're not using this for agriculture at all. Should we just sell that part of the building or sell that location because we can't find any way of using it for agricultural purposes?
Okay, thank you.
On slide 15, I just wanted to touch on this is the leasing rates, their comparison specifically for the Atlanta markets. Valbridge, there is a series of studies done by a company called Valbridge, reviewing all of the properties for all of the state markets, market appraisals, rental rates, everything. They went into quite a great deal of detail, and we want to recognize some of what their findings were. And so for the Atlanta market, you can see here, in almost all circumstances across all of the different buildings and what have you, the average rent rates being utilized at the the Atlanta market are in the region of 100 to 200% below market rates. For some of the activities at the market, we're talking more like 200 to 60%. And in one situation, it's excessive and goes to over 400% price, where a required price increase to match the market rates. If we could bring the market rate or bring all of our leasing rates back in line with what would be an appropriate market rate, you'd expect something in the region of, in the ideal world where it doesn't actually kick out any tenants because they don't want to deal with that rate, you'd be looking at $4 to $6 million of additional revenue. Realistically, you probably wouldn't make that step all the way up in one go, because there would be it will require a certain amount of negotiation and discussion with your tenants to ensure that you end up making use of that space. So I wouldn't necessarily expect that, we'll bump it up to market rates and expect to see that 4 to 6 million. It would probably be something a little bit below that. But there is a significant amount of potential in terms of revenue improvements just by bringing rates back in line or closer in line with the market.
I've got a question. Building T, is that new building we built out there?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the Collins/Phoenix building.
Well, Building T is brand new and it's,
Yeah.
I don't know, if Building T was brand new. And
Yeah, I literally just made a note of that to triple confirm, but I think that was part of I'm guessing part of the arrangement of when they decided to build it in conjunction with Collins, and I'm assuming that was.
I don't even know who owns it. I just know we put some
Yeah,
money
no,
in
that's
that.
largely the
And I
Collins
have
and
no
Phoenix
idea who
facility.
the person is, and I'm
Yeah.
not picking on anybody. And they might have put some money into it. I don't know.
That's where I was
They
going.
definitely did.
That's where I was
I have
going.
no idea,
That-
you
that's
know,
what's
there might
underneath
be
that.
something behind it. But you know, with us just looking, when you're just looking at the numbers, it
Yeah,
makes
no,
you-
that one jumps out.
that
But the
jumps
question about
out.
30 is an interesting one. I don't think.
But
I have no
30,
idea.
I don't have any idea. What?
I think that must be.
I think I'll have to pull up the map and review it.
Give us the reason on 30, and then give us the reason why building in is so close to market rental now.
In,
N is the one that's the closest to market rates, and 30 is on the other end of the spectrum. So some detail behind it. I
Yep.
don't have the detail myself.
I've got the detail on my computer. It's in the
think-
Valbridge report. I don't remember it off the top of my head as to the
We'll look it
regional,
up.
but we'll certainly include that in the fuller
But I do think
findings.
Lisa's right. I think 30 is the sheds, and they're
well, I do know, and I'm not making excuses for anybody, but a lot of those things about the rental, a lot of things weren't fixed and the tenant wanted something fixed. And so we would agree if they fixed it, we wouldn't go up on the rent, and they had to do a lot of the fixing themselves because
that's true.
going back that we didn't have the money to do it.
That's true.
And so if we can get some money and fix these things up, then we can they will understand why we have to go up on the rent.
Yes.
But you know, a long time ago, we didn't even have the light bulbs to put in there.
It's true.
Building 30 is the maintenance building.
A maintenance building.
Yes.
Well, why are we paying rent if for maintenance?
It's ASFM maintenance.
I think that one is a combination building. There is
Yeah.
maintenance and a it is in one structure. There is maintenance and a small amount of warehouse space as well
On the backside of it.
on the back end of it, if my memory serves.
We will.
But we will confirm the rationale behind the outlier ones.
Representative Watson.
One more question. The market rent per unit area is very close across all of these buildings. Like the market is the market not dry, refrigerated, open? The market rate looks like it's, about the same per square foot per unit area, no matter what the structure is.
So there is some variation with regards to what is refrigerated, what is not, because
I mean, there's not much of I would think that any of the refrigerated space on here would be much higher at the market rate versus just dry storage rate.
Most of that's in T, and that's the highest one, but there is some refrigerated space in other ones, right?
yeah.
That's the oldest quality.
Yeah, I understand,
I just assumed there would be more of a scale of cold storage versus dry storage, but
I don't. So
Could help us, could
so
hurt us.
You're absolutely right. There is a variation between the two of them. It is interesting to note that their evaluation in terms of the market rates were relatively close together.
same, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know their methodology that well.
Yeah.
certainly.
But if we go to raising,
we got the
Yeah,
market
the rent on
rates.
somebody that's got dry storage is the same as somebody that's got refrigerated, we're going,
Yeah.
there will be trouble.
Yeah,
When
And
when the
this-
decision is made to actually raise the rates, you'll have to be much more precise to
Right.
matching it to
Gotcha.
current rates, because recognize this was of course done. This study was done in 2021, so it's already going to be out of date to current market rates. But directionally, it will still be true that in terms of trying to identify that there is a gap to what would be a market rate. If anything, I would argue that maybe the refrigerated space is even more expensive
Right.
if we use building T as the example, which is heavily refrigerated.
Representative, Senator Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Is there any freezer space there?
There's cooler space.
I mean, I know there's cooler space, but
Yes,
it's,
yes, I believe there is.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
T definitely
Absolutely.
does. I was just trying to think beyond T. T absolutely does. I'm just trying to think beyond T.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Full
I have to.
freezer, yeah.
do we know how many square feet of freezer space there is there?
Well, the freezer space would be more than refrigerating, wouldn't it?
Yes, ma'am. It most
Oh, that
definitely.
would absolutely be more.
That's what I'm curious. I'm trying to get a price right now on a new freezer and it's not that big of a freezer and it's over 7 figures, you know? But this is just something for thought from somebody that is in business, you know?
Well, maybe going back to this study they did in 2021 is not something we need to look at on the rental
Well,
rate.
I just wanted to make one suggestion, just think about. So we're a South Georgia food manufacturer, right? And the last year, freight has become such an issue for us in that per unit or per cobbler, our freight costs have doubled, you know? And to the point that, you know, you gotta, you know, it's about 66 cents for a 2-pound cobbler to get it shipped to its destination, right? And so with what we do, you know, some orders you may ship, if it goes to a major retailer, you're shipping a semi-load. But if it's going to different DCs, you may ship 2 or 4 pallets. And I just wonder if it's not something that we could do in terms of, if there's a lot of freezer space there, if you couldn't have a co-op in terms of Georgia food manufacturers that could come together,
Great idea.
use that space so that when we ship something, you know, it's got, you know, 4 pallets, you know, this or whatever. And it's just, I think it's something that you could use that space that would also benefit Georgia food manufacturers in terms of, because you would then be getting the rate of a semi-load or a rate of a half a semi-load versus 2 pallets.
It's really a lot of opportunities issues with it.
It certainly wouldn't
Yeah,
run
that's
foul
great
of
idea.
gratuities and issues. It would just require the appropriate investment, ensuring that there's the
Yeah.
structure and establishment available for, I guess, common use.
That's worth exploring.
I believe that most of the freezer spaces
Are there any other questions on the rental space?
full leased.
If not, we'll just move on.
Yep. So that largely talking in terms of the Atlanta markets. Stepping into the next section is recommendations regarding the regional markets. As we mentioned earlier, these recommendations include the Garden City market, going back to the local, or going to the local municipality for operation. It includes Cairo and Thomasville being potentially consolidated and combined into a single market. It includes the conducting in-depth operational reviews for repeatedly unprofitable markets, and also just the general recommendation that the other markets be retained as a part of the group of farmers markets. Before I get into any questions, 2 points I would like to make. One regarding the Cairo and Thomasville one is just from what we found, these are very small markets. You're talking about markets which are 16 miles apart. Cairo is the smallest in terms of revenue overall. Given proximity and given the general size of operations, this is where we thought that there may be potential to consolidate the 2 markets, recognizing, of course, that would require some degree of investment or operational change in order to be able to absorb the activities from the second site. The second point was regarding the in-depth operational reviews of repeatedly unprofitable markets. This is kind of a big point, which is, you know, we recognize that there are some markets which have been unprofitable for quite a long time. Cordial, we're looking at, I think it was 20 plus years. Certainly numbers running all the way back into 2008 are all unprofitable. Macon was unprofitable for, I think it was 10 years up until this past year, where it turned a profit, but is also expected to slightly backslide into being unprofitable in the 2022 numbers. In general, with regards to the markets, as long as they're running a profit, we feel that's all well and good. You can kind of leave them alone. But those ones which are consistently and repeatedly unprofitable, we believe that there should be a process in place to undertake the appropriate reviews of those markets, and that would include a combination of lease rate reviews. You know, are we leasing at the appropriate rates? Leasing strategy. Have we exhausted all possibilities for utilizing the space. I recognize that probably also includes, have we looked at the cabinet makers in terms of being able to use some of the space, but have we investigated what are our options for that space? General contract reviews. So have we gone through all of the contracts that have been renewed on a regular basis and reviewed? Are they still applicable? Are there opportunities to adjust to a more competitive term? I recognize that some of the markets have done this over the last couple of years, Cordial being one in particular, who went through, I think it was $100,000 worth of improvements in terms of reducing their expenses by doing reviewing their contracts. And changing those operations. And then also really thinking about the long-term viability of those markets. If we've gone through all of those steps of reviewing the leases, reviewing our strategy, and reviewing the contracts which are operated there, and there is still no path to profitability, then we have to really consider and seriously think about whether or not the market makes sense. Or should be divested appropriately, or just conveyed back to the local municipality for use, for the land to be used in another manner. So I'll take a pause there because I'm betting that there may be some questions or comments regarding some of that as they.
Any questions? Representative Gilliard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On Cordell, I have a good Ebonic question. Did my seatmate Noel Williams go up there and buy all those watermelons to make the profit go up to about 100,000? That's my first question. Secondly, I want to thank the committee for coming down to Garden City and entrusting the visit from the plan that we had. I think y'all done an excellent job. I can only tell you that those tenants like in-laws and Leopold's Ice Cream and others are very enthused about the opportunity. And thank you for entrusting that that it's a plan that's in action. They've been working on it for a long time. They have the Convention Bureau, which is a part of the hotel sales tax that would probably be able to benefit on advertisement. And just the resources. Mr. Leopold just celebrated over 100 years in service the other day. And I can tell you that downtown Savannah was filled up with people from all over the country. It would bring a lot to Garden City to have Leopold's Ice Cream and others there. And so to the committee, beforehand, I just want to thank you for entrusting to come down and see the plan that they're trying to work on.
Well, after going to visit Leopold, they do need extra space, and they are using dairy products, so it's sort of like making a creamery is like a farming, and I thought they had great ideas, and I think it would just really boost. And somebody was saying that who
My wife saw him on television yesterday. The Jennifer Lopez and wedding that was in McIntosh County.
and they served ice cream, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Were you at the wedding, Representative? Were you at the wedding?
Not yet, I'm waiting on my
Ben Affleck, is that who?
There you go.
Jennifer.
Okay, Senator Watson, Representative Watson, y'all got y'all some mixed up.
You are
You just said,
confused.
"No, I know it."
And we may have to, this would probably be a question we would answer before we made any of this happen, but in Cairo and then possibly Macon or Cordell, were there any improvements made to those facilities in recent years that would impact a moving, or even Savannah? I don't think there was any there when we were there. I don't remember seeing any improvements that would have.
Cairo recently had, I believe, a new roof and some improvements to some plumbing.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Well, I'm sure y'all are aware that we did recently have given the farmer's market in Columbus to the city county city governor of Columbus. That
Yeah.
was because, you know,
Yeah.
it was not, but one thing too, and I was aware when they did that, the difference between us going to Garden City has a plan.
Yeah.
And you know, and I know that we're not going to invest that kind of money.
Yeah.
And it's going to really be a boost to them. And we all, you know, that makes a big difference. And we gave it to the city of Columbus, but I don't know what their plans were, but at least they've got a plan. It's great.
No, agree.
And
Agree. And we're all willing to be ice cream testers if Leopold's comes to the market. So
Certainly feel like we missed
Played to
out
my
on
strength.
not being there for
play to my
the
strengths.
centenary.
Senator Goodman.
I just wanted to add real quick. Thank you, Madam Chairman. So if you're sending 2 pallets of something, it costs you about $700 a pallet. If you send a truckload, it's about $50 a pallet. This is not, you know,
Unbelievable.
so when you think about somebody like Leopold's Ice Cream or some of these smaller food manufacturers, I just want to put that on the radar. That's something, if we could use some kind of facility, I mean,
It's a really good thought.
as far as being able to help your small food manufacturers across the state to be competitive with, you know, these huge corporations, the shipping and the consolidation part of that is a very big part. That is a barrier to entry for small manufacturers. So if,
Excellent point.
Well, why don't you work on that? Maybe we can get some in the budget. I'm sure.
Touche.
Senator Say. Okay, well, so I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you for
and-
joining us. We
And
appreciate it.
you can tune in
very
on your car telephone and listen to the rest of it. All right, yeah.
All good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any questions? No other questions? Let's
Okay,
move on.
we'll continue on. Then the last area of improvements were those operational improvements, which we are recommending across all of the sites. As mentioned earlier, 2 of these improvements are considered to be realistically health and safety issues. First is regarding the requiring provision of bill of lading for all trucks to come onto site. So effectively making sure that we understand what goods are being moved in and out of each of the individual sites. Second is making sure that there is some mechanism of support or staff to help facilitate a review of contracts for some of these regional markets. And for the market managers, they are absolutely trying their hardest, but not necessarily always have the support to go through that process. We would recommend that there is some form of some formal process whereby those contracts are reviewed, and if necessary, some support is provided to undertake those reviews for each of these markets on a regular basis. In an authority, that may actually happen more. It may be less of a contentious issue because it may be you end up having longer term contracts, so you don't need quite as regular a contract review process. But as long as we are in a situation where there are constantly, you know, annual cycling contracts, we believe that this should be something which is done every 2 to 5 years.
I've got a question. You keep on talking about contracts. I saw the contracts in Cordele. Did you find that in other places too?
The contracts in Cordele?
I saw the amount of contracts in
No,
Cordele.
so specifically, there has been a dramatic improvement in Cordele. I wouldn't lay claim that the other markets have that kind of magnitude of improvements, but I imagine I would not be surprised at all that if there are improvements that can be made at the other markets through just effectively reevaluation of the existing contracts and whether or not there are new market conditions or new players which allow for better rates or better service. It would not surprise me in the slightest if that were the case, because I can imagine, or we have heard from multiple markets that are effectively these get just carried over year to year to year without actually being put under scrutiny on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
And then the final one is the other health and safety recommendation, which is around that provision of a list of approved or recommended vendors and contractors for on-site activities. most heavy industry sites, most major operational sites will have a very clear understanding of who are the contractors who are allowed to come on site to do repairs, to do maintenance, to operate on the facilities that are there. As a lot of the maintenance is actually being currently done and supported by the individual companies, the tenants who are there, there isn't a clear statement of these are the vendors who you should be going to, or we believe that you should be going to. We don't think that this shouldn't be you can only use these people. It should very clearly be, oh, you have somebody you want to use, by all means, put it in, let's review them and get them onto the approved list. But it's just a recognition that as long as, and it's in line with the bill of lading component, as long as we don't know what is happening on the market, we don't know, and when I say that, I mean, we don't know everything that is happening. We know a lot of what is happening on the markets, but as long as we don't know everything that is happening on the markets, when a health or safety issue ends up happening, God forbid, and hope it never actually does happen, but when it does end up happening, we don't want to be caught in that circumstance of saying, we don't know why it happened, we weren't sure. So we're just recommending that those two steps, bill of lading, so that we understand the goods that are moving in and out, which would also provide us the benefit of understanding what is Georgia grown moving in and out, and then also understand some degree of understanding of the people brought in to conduct works on the sites.
I was whispering in Sam's ear.
Your light was blinking.
It was just. It's all good.
I'm leaving it open for any questions here at the moment or comments. Okay, then I will pass this back to Brett to talk about next steps.
Now we're in the home stretch. So this is next steps. There is additional material in the appendix that we don't plan to go through, but if questions come up, then that could be helpful. We can go to it, but it's there for just further edification. So I'm moving on to slide 19 now. So big picture, we think the number one thing that needs to happen coming out of today is we keep the momentum. To quote Senator C, we get out of neutral. So there's several things that need to probably be agreed on that we move forward on to keep that momentum. And this is a potential set of those. Number one is this discussion around authority potentially versus a modified current state. So let's look at what that would look like. What are the pros and cons of that? If the authority is the way to go, let's get drafting that language and think about that organizational structure and governance. And to that point, I think for whatever path you go down is quickly getting your arms around what is that business system or management system need to look like. There's a slide behind this that's a high level kind of, this is what a business management system looks like for a business, and here's some key points on it. I'm not going to bore you with that, but the bottom line is we move forward to a new state. Let's get that thought through quickly and vetted so it doesn't hold us up. And then second is if we're in agreement around the retail portion of Atlanta getting removed from the current site, is to conduct interviews with tenants, do that in the most thoughtful, careful way we can, and get that started as soon as you're ready. Third is let's figure out what the next steps are for conveying Garden City over to the local municipality. Again, good plan there. We're aligned with it. Let's not lose momentum there. Fourth, and you could do this in-house, leveraging some additional outside resources. There's probably some inexpensive resources that you could do to do this, which is to get a little deeper on the lease rate review. A lot of questions came up around that. You could probably do that in the next month or two in a fairly low intensity way to answer some of the questions without having a firm like us and a big study. There's probably ways to do that that would be cost effective to plug some of the holes in the data there. And we can direct you to some folks there if you need help with that. And then similar, but this is a little more difficult analysis. We do think we got to get our arms around the Georgia grown moving in and out of these markets. And some of the data exists, some of it doesn't, but let's understand that. So as we're moving forward in the new world, we have a good process for recognizing that, and we know what is Georgia grown and what is not. Those are kind of the 5 key areas we think that need to get moving and moving quickly. So, and obviously we're willing to help where we can and where appropriate. And we will take everything we've done and put it into a kind of a capstone report, if you will, that will provide, by the end of September. It'll be everything you've seen before and all of our data put in a nice, prettier place, and we'll make sure that you get all of that from us. So that's it for prepared remarks. Again, more data behind this in the appendix, but happy to stop there, take a breath. Additional questions, we're happy to answer them, and we can stay as long as you need us to. But we're grateful for the opportunity. We have thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully we've helped shed some light. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate the job you've done. And Stuart, thank you for bringing them to us. Representative Watson.
Okay, here it is. So the in the appendix on page 27, the DNR Lodge Parks.
Yep.
Is that have to be an authority? Larry or Chairman Walker, you may. Did you have to be an authority to dedicate a percentage of those funds?
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'll respond to that.
Go ahead, please do.
My understanding is we would just need to we would need to put it in state statute or put it in the code. And we could, I think, pretty much mirror what's in the code for the state parks.
So
But there, if you remember, Madam Chairman may can help me remember, but we found some language in the code now that made us wonder if the Ag Commissioner already had that authority to retain revenues, but it was pretty vague. And in talking with Commissioner Black, he said they had pursued that in the past with no success. And I think if we put it in there very specifically, like DNR has, then they could retain revenue for operations and maintenance, and then whatever excess they didn't use annually for that, they would have to return to the general fund. So there's no, in my understanding, there wouldn't be any really long-term carryover. They may could encumber some of that money within the fiscal year and carry it over, but that would help. I don't think it's, and then they could come to us for bonding for capital projects. They could come to the legislature with a request. The Ag Commissioner could. That way you're not having to shift any employees over or create an authority it would, give additional revenue.
But at 5% is not much. 5% of the revenue is not much.
I don't think it's limited to 5%,
Oh,
Madam
okay.
Chair.
This was said, the DNR has 5%, isn't it?
That's not the way Commissioner Williams, that's not the way they explained it to us last week.
So when we had the discussion with them specifically about their arrangement, and it may be that they are not utilizing it, or maybe that there is an addition to what we understood, but they have specifically for the lodge parks, so not for the entirety of DNR, but for the lodge parks that they lease to the North Georgia Mountain Authority. That arrangement that they have with the North Georgia Mountain Authority has a retention of 5% of revenue for maintenance purposes. So it is specific to that arrangement that they have for those parks.
Yeah, so I'm not talking
Yeah.
about that
Yeah,
arrangement.
so I think they might
Okay.
be talking two
All
different
right.
things.
I'm talking
Okay.
about
I was just looking at the DNR Lodge Park thing on the example.
I think we might be talking about two different
I think we're talking about
circumstances.
two different things.
Yeah.
So Amicalola Falls, for example, if it costs, $1 million a year to operate and put roofs and all that stuff, do whatever they got to do, they can take the money they get from park passes and from cabin rentals and apply it to that. based on what's in the code. That's the way I understood it.
Well, okay.
So they are retaining revenue on state parks to pay the maids and pay the lawn, whoever cuts the grass and do repairs. And if they have excess, they turn it into the treasury. And Sam was there. I mean, that was our understanding, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why I was curious if this is what Simon was, that's the North Georgia Mountain Authority stuff, but
They just do
Amicable, yeah.
they do the lodges.
Yeah, they specifically handle the large parks.
but they're only in that region, that North
Region,
Georgia. The rest of the parks are state owned and operated by us and.
Yeah, maybe I should have
department.
used an example that's not in North Georgia, but
Yeah,
like Little Omogie State Park, whatever money they take in, they can use it to run the place.
But some of these markets would not have enough money that they took in to run.
But I don't, yeah, that's
and
correct.
that, I mean,
but
that's
don't-
kind of another question, I guess, is if Atlanta brings in all the money, how do you distribute it back down?
Yes.
Yes, that's a key issue
Yeah.
to be
And if,
resolved.
if the code would allow them to retain the money that they individually create, effectively
Right.
their own revenue, then there would be difficulties with what the current would be difficulties without having the ability to share that money as a pool.
I mean, I think the ag commissioner could make that allocation. I mean, I think that'd be his responsibility. Unless we got it really specific in the code that it had to be prorated based on revenue per location, and I don't know that we'd want to do that.
Yeah, we can talk
Sorry.
about this in the interim, okay? Anybody else having any other questions?
I just have one little
Okay.
quick question. I'm sorry. I know
No,
we've
no
gone long,
problem.
but did you all learn any more about what's going on in Macon with GEMA and some additional facilities they've taken over that they're leasing, or an expansion of GEMA in Macon?
I specifically asked the market manager if they had requested any more space on the market, and he said no. I asked him, had there been discussion as to whether they wanted more space in the past but couldn't get it? He said no. There's been no requests for additional space and no plan right now
Okay.
for
I don't know
additional
where I
space.
got that from.
They have a building and two sort of shed areas, and they allow the market to use the shed areas for Christmas tree sales when it's, when that time comes, but otherwise they're empty. And then they're in their building, the enclosed building, but they do have 3 buildings right now in the market.
Any other questions? Thank you, and we'll be back in touch, okay?
Thank
Thanks.
you all
very
I
much.
appreciate it.
Thank you.